For today's critical thought, we are returning to another big debate when it comes to game design. Is it going to be console versus PC? Sega versus Nintendo? What is a roguelike? Well, no. For today, we are going to be talking about deterministic versus random. And just what is the RNG when it comes to enjoying these videos? One of the more fascinating discussions about game design, especially when it comes to any kind of RPG or abstracted-based design, is the use of deterministic or randomization. Now, if you're not familiar with what we're talking about, randomization obviously means that we're dealing with RNG. 1 in 5 chance of scoring critical hit. 99% chance you're going to miss. 20% chance you're going to get a crit. Stuff like that. Deterministic refers to anything that is basically fixed. So, if I'm playing any kind of card-based game and I draw a card that says, do 10 points of damage, I'm doing 10 points of damage. We don't need to consult dice rolls, we don't need to get good, do any kind of APM. It says I do 10 damage, I do 10 damage. Now, as anyone who's played a tabletop or deck builder knows, where things get very interesting is when you have different rules intersecting with each other. So, the example that I just mentioned, let's say my opponent has a card, negate all spell damage for this round. And then I have a monster on the field that negates the use of spell cards by your opponent. And then this just turns into a Yu-Gi-Oh episode. Now, the use of both deterministic and randomization has been something that's had a lot of push and pull when it comes to design over the years. And it has to do with how they operate at the extreme ends and where misconceptions and debates arrive. So, if we talk about randomization, RNG, RN gods, anything like that, the more randomization that's introduced to a game means there's less control by the player. And a huge debate or a huge misconception a lot of non-fans of roguelikes and roguelites have is that they view RNG as just pure chaos. I take 3 steps forward, lightning strikes my counter, does 9999 damage, I die. Next run, I take 3 steps forward, find a treasure chest with the best weapon in the game, and I proceed to kill everything. But as we all know when it comes to this kind of design, pure chaos is the worst thing for any roguelike or any kind of run-based experience. Because at the end of the day, whether your game is deterministic or RNG dependent, the player needs to understand, what is my role in this game? How do I win? Do I win by killing all the enemies? Do I win by collecting more and more specials and power-ups and blasts and explosions? Do I win by just getting a sword and start slashing things? The player needs to know what their impact is, and pure RNG robs them of that. If I walk into a room and I just die immediately with no impact, okay, so what could I improve? Not walk into rooms? And good randomization is about providing the player with essentially a known or a basic foundation that is fixed, but then the elements around that are different each time I play. A quintessential example of this is of course the Binding of Isaac. Not counting the post-game shenanigans and all that. On a normal map of Binding of Isaac, I know that the floor is going to spawn a store, a treasure room, and a boss. Now, I know day after day, run after run, floor to floor, those 3 elements are fixed constants. What I don't know is what's in the shop, what's in the treasure room, and what boss I'm going to fight. And this is a major aspect when we talk about how randomization keeps someone playing. There has to be a sense of control. If I do this, the game should respond like that. But how the game responds differs. When we talk about ARPG design, this is very much where the whole idea of surprise mechanics come into play. That I kill a super early enemy, I expect something good to drop. If I clear the super difficult masochistic dungeon level 900 plus on super hardcore difficulty, I better get something good for my troubles. And this is how players are conditioned and they start learning the rules of the game. So whether your game has RNG or not, they still understand that. Now, the flip side of this is when we talk about games that are fully and 100% deterministic. So in this respect, how I play the game is about understanding exactly what the rules imply. So here's an example. Let's say I'm playing a game that I need to get to a checkpoint and there are 5 enemies in front of me. Each enemy does 1,000 points of damage and I have 5,000 points of health. In this example, I'm screwed. There's no get good, no RNG. There's nothing that I can do as a player that's going to get past this. They're going to do 5,000 points of damage. I have 5,000 points of health. 1, 2, 3, we're done. We have to find another way around. So where RNG could deliver a little bit of spiciness to this is, let's say I have a 50% chance to dodge an attack. So all I need is to basically roll heads 1 out of 5 times and I can beat this encounter. Now, of course, that could happen to a few of you. You could miss, you could get all 5s. You could be like me and miss a 100% chance to hit in a game. So no one better ever tell me again about the odds when it comes to probability. Wanted to pop in here with a quick addendum to our last point. Having randomized elements in purely deterministic games can lead to spicy outcomes, but the same can be held in reverse. A good example of this is from XCOM 2, with the specialist support characters like little droid, flying thing, whatever it is, and how it can do a whopping amazing 1 point of damage. 1 point of damage doesn't sound all that fantastic in any other game, but in XCOM it is fixed damage. There's no RNG, no probability, it will do 1 point of exact damage. And in a game where everything else can have a probability chance, having something that is fixed every single time, that is reliable every single time, can add a lot and once again leads to some very interesting choices. But deterministic design takes us more into the realm of puzzle, that everything is known. I know the enemy, if he's here, he's going to attack this building. If I intersect, he's going to go over there. Another big example, this is of course Into the Breach. And Into the Breach is a really good intersection between deterministic and random design. Every turn in Into the Breach, I know 100% exactly what the enemy is going to do. However, I don't know where the enemy is actually going to start messing things up before that turn starts. So the enemies, when they pop out of the ground, once they pop out, they're going to have a random action. But it's from that point on that I need to decide, how do I deal with this? And this is where deterministic design gets very popular. It rewards careful and strategic thinking. Again, we don't need to worry about dice rolls or RNG, or maybe the enemy will dodge, maybe they won't, maybe my guy will hit, maybe he won't. I know exactly what every single action is going to imply. And it's up to me to figure out what is the best possible course of action given all these knowns. As an interesting counter, or a tangent for a second, this is one of the reasons why I've become very leery of any kind of abstracted game that hides results or important information from the player. Because having the player have to figure out mathematical equations as to whether or not they're going to hit, whether somebody's going to proc or not, it just distracts from the game. And this is why, again, that for today's audiences, it's better to give the player all relevant information they need to make these decisions. Because kind of the cornerstone of our video for today is that you do not want the player to be confused as to why something is happening. And this is often the issue when it comes to RNG. If an enemy has a 20% chance to hit, or a 60% chance to hit, what does that even mean to the player? At the end of the day, it's just 50-50. He's going to smack me, or he's not going to smack me. But the more knowns or fixed elements in your game, it allows the player again to start understanding how all this stuff is going to intersect with each other. And it's where you can make some very interesting rules and rule breaks, going back to, once again, the tabletop deck building design. And this is also why a lot more modern strategy games and RPGs have been embracing low number design. Because low numbers are also where we get to very deterministic aspects. If I have 5 points of health and the enemy hits me for 1 point of damage, I can take 4 more hits. If the enemy is hitting me for 6,700,432 and I have 20 trillion points of health, it's a lot harder immediately to know what that means. And it's, again, why some of the more fascinating aspects of design in the last 5 to 7 years have been games that have explored this combination of deterministic and random elements. And some good examples of this and how we've been seeing developers kind of square the circle between random and fixed is providing very spiky approaches to RNG. So what I mean by that is that a lot of strategy and RPG based games use the full gambit of probability. You can have a 0 to 100% chance to hit, miss, crit, whatever, and so does the enemy. But as I said a few minutes ago, this doesn't mean much to a player. 20% versus 25%. Wow, how am I going to tell whether or not that whopping 5% actually mattered? So what we've seen is games trying to make that RNG very apparent and also fixed, so that the player once again has guaranteed knowledge to what's going to happen. A good example of this is from the Mario plus Rabbids and Persona Tactica games. In Mario Rabbids, basic developers said this: the character is out of cover, 1% chance to hit, no ifs, ands, or buts. If they're behind half cover, 50% chance to hit. If they're behind full cover, 0% chance to hit. That's it. Those are your 3 standard states for whether or not you can hit an enemy: 100, 50, or 0. And this again allows a player to easily understand what is happening on the field. If my character is behind full cover, I don't need to worry about enemy to hit chances. I don't need to be constantly checking what their movement and fire range is. If I'm behind 100% cover, I'm 100% safe. If I'm behind half cover, I'm half safe. And this allows a player again to make very easy estimations about what's going to happen. When I played Hard West, it was a little bit harder. When I was behind full cover, hunkered down, I think that reduced my chance of 10 to 20% chance to be hit, and I still got hit. So I am the anti-luck when it comes to strategy and RPG design. Now, another good example of this is the evolution of Darkest Dungeon 1 to Darkest Dungeon 2 in terms of their battle systems. In the first Darkest Dungeon, again, they used full probability, 0 to 100. So you could have your character dodge a 20% chance of dodging. You could have a skeleton somehow matrix dodge every attack during a turn, and then they crit your character to then cause a stress buildup to let them go into a stress spray that ruins your entire team. And I'm sure no one here watching this has ever had that happen. But again, the problem is that it makes combat too unpredictable. And this again goes back to kind of like earlier XCOM games and Firaxis' XCOM games. I can do the exact perfect plan. All the buffs, move my character in perfect position, set up perfectly, and they miss. And for a few people, that's when they take their computer and throw it out the window. Or they just smash their keyboard into millions and millions of little pieces. Because again, it's not a case of the player needing to improve or get good. It's basically the game deciding, we're going to let you win, or we're going to let you lose. So what they did in Darkest Dungeon 2 was they combined this kind of deterministic and RNG into the token system. The tokens in Darkest Dungeon 2 all have all kinds of varieties of effects. Burn tokens, poison tokens, dodge tokens, protection tokens, tank tokens, lots and lots of tokens. Each token provides a very specific and, again, deterministic outcome. If I have a protection token on my character, I know I'm going to be taking, or I will resist half damage. Now, if the enemy has like an armor pierce or infect that negates that, again, this is where we get to that kind of spiciness of deterministic rules. But it's also how they change how dodge works. In Darkest Dungeon 2, everyone has a 100% chance to hit. You, enemies, whatever. If you have a standard dodge token, that chance gets reduced to a 50% chance to get hit. If you have an advanced token, or the level 2 token, it goes down to a 25% chance. So if I have a character who has 3 dodge tokens, I know that they're going to be able to have a 50% chance to avoid damage for the next 3 turns. These, again, lead us to interesting choices. I know what's going to happen, or I have a good idea what's going to happen. I can plan around that. I can build a strategy around it. If it was, again, completely random, 0 to 100, again, I could dodge the next 10 attacks like a pro, or I could eat 10 attacks on top of a crit, on top of my character gets killed before I could even do a thing. And again, like as I said a few minutes ago, this is kind of the hallmark of our discussion. The player, at the end of the day, needs to know what they did and did it work. If I just throw a bunch of stuff at the board, hit a bunch of buttons, and I win, yay. If I throw a bunch of stuff at the board, hit a bunch of buttons, and I lose, boo. But how did I improve? How did I learn what is happening? And when we talk about deterministic and randomized elements, fans of randomization will point out that the purpose of, RNG, dodge, miss, crit, whatever, is that it gives this element of surprise, this idea that the player has to adapt to what is happening. And that is good. To go back to the biomizing and roguelike design, that's very much built into that DNA. And then McMillan told me so himself when we interviewed him. But again, there has to be these knowns. There has to be a guaranteed element that the player can start building these ideas around. Because if there isn't, if it's just pure RNG, that doesn't lead to engaging design. It doesn't lead to interesting choices. To go back to the card examples from earlier in this video, this is again why a lot of people love deck builders and CCGs and TCGs. This intersecting and how everything works together to create very unique and very fascinating designs. But the more that you kind of force the player into adapting or rolling with the punches, again, they have to be able to come at this from a place of, okay, if I do this and I get this, or this, I can go in that direction. If I get this, or this, I'm going in this direction. If it's, I could get anything as my hands go John Madden here, it doesn't really equate to an interesting time. And again, you can have spikiness, as some of the examples I mentioned earlier. Now, as another interesting point about RNG, what we've talked about so far has been an evolution of developers trying to put their finger on the scale when it comes to probability. To go back to XCOM, in design talks and interviews after the fact, they mention how if a character keeps missing or if an enemy keeps dodging, the next shot against them will have a hidden, I think it's like 5 to 10% increased chance. So even though the game says it's a 50% chance, it could be 50 plus 20, 50 plus 40. In my case, it could be 50 plus 70, I would still miss. But these elements work But to kind of bring this to the major point for today and kind of start to wrap things up, does that really make the player enjoy RNG? It's a very tough question. It's why this debate rages on. So here's the question for those of you watching. One of the major aspects of this debate is a very simple question. Can you solve RNG? Is RNG something that's supposed to be mitigated or solved? And it's a very tough question to answer. As we've said, if something is 100% deterministic, it's a puzzle. And there's nothing wrong with puzzles. But a puzzle can only really be experienced one time. Or multiple times if you forget what the solution is after a few months or a few years. RNG provides this spice. And when it's applied correctly, as with like the Spire, Balatro, Binding of Isaac, Spelunky, and many others, it can take an experience that one run is great. Now we have hundreds, thousands, millions of runs. But before all of you just immediately run and add proc gen to every game that you're making, just remember this one point. Randomization, procedural generation, stuff like this, it does not fix a bad game. If a 100% deterministic, linear, hard-coded, fix-locked, however you want to describe it, run sucks, it's boring, the controls don't work, combat doesn't feel right, procedurally generating 10,000 runs of that is not going to get people to stick around. And this is the common trap we see from a lot of novice designers when they implement RNG in their games. That, yes, being able to completely randomize the world down to the last 10,000 years of history sounds amazing and fascinating. But if your game is horrible to play, no one is going to care about. And as I said, at the end of the day, if you can make a fixed run of your game phenomenal, that's a good start. So to wrap things up for our video today, deterministic and randomized elements in games have certainly come a long way in terms of their extremes and how we've seen more developers combine these elements in interesting and unique ways. And what we've been seeing are more developers embrace this middle ground between deterministic and random elements. That yes, you can have aspects of your game be random that add that spice and kick, but they're still hard or fixed known, so the player can start planning and building their understanding of this game around. Because finally, at the end of all this, the player has to be able to understand what they did right, what they did wrong, and what is the goal of this game. How do you facilitate a win? Whether that is by using fixed elements, RNG, or a combination. Because if they cannot understand that, if it's too random, or it's too fixed, that the player just knows immediately, okay, if I don't get this, the entire run is over, they're not going to stick around. So one final question for all of you watching. What are some great examples of games that are 100% deterministic and games that are more random? And any other good examples I didn't mention here that combine the two in unique or interesting ways. So throw some dice, do some RNG, and let me know in the comments down below. And with that said, everyone, thanks for watching, and see you next time. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.